Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So how do you ensure the design of your organization is truly fit for purpose, not just on paper, but for the critical strategy your organization's future is dependent on? How do you engage with senior leaders in a way that builds trust so you really understand how value is created in their world and the difficult choices that need to be made when you design the organization? Today, we're absolutely delighted to be joined by the brilliant Jaimini Lakhani, founder of Lumiere Consulting and a leading expert in organization design and strategy. Jaimini was born in Uganda, educated in the US, and now based in the UK. And Jaimini blends personal and work-based international experience towards business challenges. Jaimini has worked in diverse industries across private, public, and third sector, from construction to retail, and across the world from China to South Africa. She's partnered with courageous and ambitious leaders in Accenture, Burberry, where she was VP for Organisation Design, the British Council, Heathrow, including the construction of Terminal T5, and BP. She's also a guest lecturer at the Claude Littner Business School for the University of West London, and she's certified to train the CIPD's Advanced Organisation Design and Development course, and that's what I first met when I was a participant on that programme. And somehow she has spare time amongst all that, where she devotes a lot of time to raising funds and actively participating in enriching the experience of the underprivileged. And the projects she's been involved in include orphanages, as well as homes for women and children in India and Kenya. So thank you so much for joining us on a very hot Friday afternoon.
Just to kick us off, so one of the things we do with the podcast is just to demystify organisation development and design a little bit. So Garen's given a bit of an overview of what you do, but can you bring that to life for us and just paint a picture of what that looks like in practice, the work that you do?
Absolutely. I absolutely love this question. And one of the reasons I love it is because as a community, we still only say those two letters, O and D. And of course, you guys know that there is an OD that is org development, and there's an OD that's org design. And I tend to kind of, lean towards the org design. But along my travels, I came across an analogy which I absolutely love. I use it all the time. It suits me really well. And it's sort of thinking about organization design and development with respect to vehicles, cars. I love cars. The analogy came from Naomi Stamford, and what it says is the practice or the art of thinking about organization design is really thinking about the type of car that you need for the context in which you're operating. So imagine, for those of you that are F1 fans, which my nephews are, do you need a race car? Is the context in which you're operating going that fast at speed? I don't know. Think of Dubai. Think of your holiday coming up, a desert safari. That's a different type of vehicle. Or are you just taking your family out for a picnic? That's when you think about what is the design. That's when you're designing the right sort of vehicle. Now, development is about maintaining that vehicle to perform at its best. So each sort of vehicle needs a different driver, different skill sets. You also need to think about whether that's fuel or electric. You need to think about the number of passengers. You need to think about continuing maintenance. So to me, that always presents itself as, a wonderful analogy. I know there's many others out there, but that one seems to have worked well for me over the last few years.
I love that. That's a really lovely analogy, which I think will resonate with people. I think it really kind of brings another kind of lens to it. So what does the work that you do now look like day to day?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. So I've been kind of hands down sort of doing, OD or organization design wasn't a language when I started to work, which probably dates me a little bit. But, I've done all sorts of things. I've done documentation. I've done technical training, guides. I've done change management. Those are the words that we used to use as I was kind of growing up in the consulting world. And then lo and behold, I started to learn about this language around organization design and development. And for the past several decades, I was just doing it. I was going from one fantastic company to another with a scary challenge, but, really an engaging challenge, and just doing the work. And I guess I started to do some speaking events. I started to, network a little bit more. And I understood that my peers or my colleagues, both in the OD practice and in the HR community, weren't necessarily having the same type of exciting gigs that I was. I was working with executives, I was doing strategic projects, and that really confused me. I ran across a Deloitte study that said that whilst people voted organization design, organization strategy, the importance of it, 88% voted the importance of it. But then when those same people were asked, do you know how to do it? Only 11% showed confidence. And I thought, this isn't right. So I actually changed the portfolio of my career. This is when I decided to not necessarily just go into one company at a time. I decided to open up my own sort of consulting practice. I decided to teach, and I decided to coach, and really try and just do some more speaking events to try and sort of break all of those myths about organization design and try and help people to understand that differentiation. We have two great specialist levers. We've got development and we've got design, and both of them are high investment choices.
And I think it's really, when you say organization design, for a lot of people, they just say, this is about structure. This is about moving boxes around on a chart.
Yes.
But it's
we
not
still
that,
have
is
that
it?
thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys must know. I mean, the first org charts were, back in the 1800s. So, it's phenomenal to me. It's, that we kind of still use that particular visual as a way in which to describe something that has evolved immensely. But yes, no, I walk into many organizations, and the first thing they sort of give me, if they have it, they don't all have it, is a stack of org charts. And I'm just like, thank you very much. That's really interesting. Now, let's have a conversation about your business.
Yeah, let's start with that. So, how do you even begin? Because it can be quite an overwhelming thing. Like sort of saying, people understand the importance of it, but they don't know how to do it. I guess one of the things I really took away from the program that I did with you is just like there's some fundamental steps that you need to take, aren't there?
Yes, no, absolutely. There are some fundamental steps. I mean, I guess to make it really practical, one of the first things one of the ethos of being a great organization design or organization development practitioners is just to be curious. We don't have the answers. The practice of hiring a consultancy to come and give you the answer, I think that was always a myth, to be honest. And thankfully, we've moved beyond that. This is about collaboration. We're in environments and contexts that none of us have ever been in before. So I think it's just let the armor down, know that you're going into a collaborative environment. So it's a good question, Garen. Let me try and give you a great example of how I unpacked someone who really didn't want to meet me. So this is a client example of a luxury retailer that I worked with. And the CEO definitely knew the capability that organization design could bring in. She asked me to work with all of her executive teams. They were really pivoting from a premium strategy to a luxury strategy. And the president of Europe sort of said, Jay, why don't you and Abigail come along? I'll give you half an hour and we'll just sort this thing out. And I thought, wow, I mean, at least I got a half an hour, right? And so I went away. I was curious. I looked at the customer base. I found out that in Europe, most of the customers were international travelers. They weren't domestic. I did look at the org charts. The org charts gave me a sense of, I didn't look at the structure. I looked at the operating model. Design is about the operating model. So I looked at that and I had some questions around the operating model. So in my half an hour, I literally just came with a bunch of questions. I said, I'm just curious. You are organized by country in Europe. And so that means that you have about 20 to 25 country directors, but your customers aren't domestic customers. Your customers are international customers. Your product is singular throughout the world. So why are you organized by Google Maps? And that really took him aback. But it kind of hit the point. And then the other thing, the organization was shifting from a strategy of really selling to wholesalers, but to reclaim the brand and to have more of a retail ownership. But in Europe, they had a tail of thousands of specialist wholesalers. And so the question is, well, why do you have someone leading your wholesale business? You're creating them an incentive to continue to push wholesale. And that's contrary to the strategy. So again, a commercial question, sort of a little bit tongue in cheek, but I only had 30 minutes. So, and that 30 minutes bought me another 2 hours. That 2 hours bought me, a workshop. That workshop bought us a 2-year partnership to really continue to evolve that organization or that particular region.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because I guess, that person would have seen this so many times and yet never thought to challenge the assumptions upon what the design is built upon. Why is it that people are blind to the things that influence the design of the organization? Why are they sort of blind to these things that are constraints that are holding their systems back?
Yeah, gosh, it's a great question. I always believe that people bring a particular perspective to their profession. And, it doesn't say anything about that executive. That executive is trained to look at products, to look at commercialization, to look at, putting together a team. And they're not necessarily trained to look at the perspective that I'm trained to do. I can't run a whole retail business, but I can see operating models. That's my experience. I can sort of ask questions so that we can collaborate. And I think this is one of the things that I also heard the CEO used to say is, and another vehicle example, but look what happens when you're on the freeway. Stay in your lane, know what you can do, and you have to trust others, because if you're not, you're sort of bashing against each other. It creates tension in the system. But if you trust each other's perspectives, then you can have a really enriching conversation. And all I ask is for people to, let the org design practitioners into the room, listen to the different perspective. And I think that's kind of where the magic happens.
And to steal Danny's question, you mentioned the word operating model. We love definition. Yeah. And I remember talking to a whole range of operating model consultants, and they all couldn't agree on what it is. But so, what's your sort of working definition? And there is something that, how do you see it? How do you visualize it? What does it require to see that?
Yeah, do you know what? Operating model is one of those words that, gets tossed around. I get into a lot of debates with strategy departments as well, or transformation departments as well, because, so there's operating model, there's business model. I think organizations create a business model where they look at different ways in which to execute strategy, earn revenue, do profits. Operating model to me is looking at, how do you work? How does all that operate? And when I say all that, I mean, what channels are you going to market with? Are you doing digital? Are you doing face-to-face? What are your different business units? And how are you categorizing those? Who are you going to partner with to deliver some of those capabilities? What are your core capabilities? And have you veered, kind of far away from it? So we're just trying to figure out sort of how do you operate? And we're just going to do an as is. And in that example that I gave you with that luxury retailer, they were operating by channel as a premium player. What they needed to do was to be channel agnostic in order to operate as a luxury player. Now, they had their strategy. It was so clear, and thankfully it was, because that allowed me to, have those curious conversations around how they were operating wasn't necessarily aligning with what they were saying in their strategy.
Yeah, I had a question there. You talked about them having a really clear strategy, which is really helpful for the sort of work that we do and that you do. What advice would you have to somebody who's working in an organisation where that strategy isn't clear, or it feels fuzzy and not really thought through?
Yeah, well, funny enough, I've been in that situation. So I was in a situation where a particular business unit that was growing really fast. So I'm talking the F1 example. They were growing so fast, it was really hard to keep up. They just, found themselves with a product in a hot market, but they embarked on. This is before I got there. They embarked on a transformation program. Now, initially, a consultancy had come in and talked to them about process redesign, making themselves streamlined. They then sort of tagged on under that transformation umbrella to do some org design. Then I was hired into the organization. I went into that business unit. And again, I was asking them these questions. I was saying, what are your target markets? Who are your customers? How are you going to go to market? Because they had a mix of going direct to market, but they also had a mix of kind of trying to use a third party to buffer within them. So the strategy wasn't clear to me how they were actually going to go to market, the business model, and they were spending a lot of money, trying to do a transformation program. So it did take a few efforts because, of course, when leaders invest in a program, they don't necessarily want to backtrack. But I think there was some real evidence that they were spending a lot on that program and they weren't necessarily getting that return on investment. So it took a little bit of time. I introduced them to a strategy partner. Of course, I can have some questions, but business strategy is not necessarily my lane. So I introduced them to a strategy partner who did a little bit of work to make them aware of what potential strategies could look like. So again, just a soft touch. And then I was able to come in there and complement that with options, because it was, if your strategy is this, then this could be your operating model. But if your strategy is that, then, I would think of something else. So I think that conversation, just opening up some options, helped them to realize that they needed to invest in the strategy first before we really tried to align a design around that and an operating model that fit with that strategy.
I love that on so many levels, because I guess what you've done is you've done it in a very gentle way, but often with a strategy is like, it's done. The task is complete. We move forward. Now it's up to interpretation by others. And, it's almost like giving yourself permission to sort of push back and say, well, before we all go and put all our resources to bear, it's okay to take a step back, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the other thing I would say is sometimes businesses think they have a strategy, but actually it's not really a strategy. It's maybe a glittering generality, if I can, kind of be so bold and throw that out. To say that we want customer excellence from a design standpoint, I don't know what that means. I don't know if that is my F1 car or if that's my family going to a picnic, because I can deliver you customer excellence either way. So, what I always say to my practitioners when I'm building a team or, talking to executives is, okay, let's unpack that. When we say digital, let's unpack that. Do we mean e-commerce? Do we mean automation? Do we mean self-service? There are a lot of things that we need to understand so that we design the capabilities around that. Do we mean the whole organization even? Because, that's quite a bigger chew than to just say that we want to focus on a particular part of the business. Agile is another one. When we say agile, what do we mean? Do we mean faster? Do we mean more flexible? Do we want everyone to be agile? Really? So again, let's unpeel the layers. It's so important. And if people needed evidence, there's so much great research out there. An organization that is able to align its operating model with its strategy is nearly 2.5 times more likely to have greater revenue growth. This is what I mean about a high investment capability. More growth, it's probably 10 times more able to make faster decisions. People like that. You retain your talent. Just unpacking those strategies is really important to, for the business itself and also to get a good design.
And as you're talking, I'm sort of mentally ticking off the different capabilities in an effective organization design practitioner. And I'm hearing, obviously, commerciality is important, the ability to sniff out what's going on here. Obviously, the technical skills are hygiene factors, aren't they? But it sounds like there's a big facilitation point here as well, because you're trying to get busy senior people to convene them and take them through the process where there is some form of agreement.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because when I started out in my consulting world and facilitation came up, I was the first one that sort of turned around and ran the other way. And I thought, I'm not a facilitator. I can't do this. I was watching some, really great colleagues that were excellent at it. And I think it's because maybe I thought it was something different to who I am. And as I started to have to do it more, but I enjoy what I do, it really is a genuine conversation. Facilitation is a genuine conversation. There's no, obviously there's, some tools, some techniques that you can learn. but the ability to really put yourselves in that executive's shoes. When I was a consultant, it's very difficult when you're looking outside in. You don't know what's going on in the organization. You don't know all the agendas at play. You don't know all the pressures. You don't know personally what people might be going through. But when you're in an organization, you get the sense of that. And everyone is trying to do their best. But as a designer, you have a huge responsibility because you end up seeing perspectives that nobody else can see. And that carries with it a real level of responsibility because you're now trying to reveal to others what they can't see. And you have to do that in a really authentic, quite a gentle, but, just a very trusting way because you're all after the same goal. And once you remember that, org design practitioners work for the brand. They don't work for any single executive. I know someone's going to pay the bill, but it's one of the core principles of being a great practitioner is you are there to work for the brand, the mission. And, technically we all are. So let's have that conversation.
Hi, we're just pausing this interview for a moment. Have you ever finished an episode of the OrgDev podcast and wish you had a cheat sheet that summarises all of the key points? Us too, so we made one. It's called From Pod to Practice, and each week in our newsletter we'll share a 2-page summary of the latest OrgDev episode, and it includes key takeaways, a reflection prompt, and one small action you can try.
And it's all in a digital format with space at the end to add your own notes and reflections, and it's designed to help you take the learning from the podcast into your day-to-day work. So to get your copy, just sign up to our Next Step to Better newsletter. The link's in the show notes, or you can visit our website at www.distinction.live to get the latest From Pod to Practice in your inbox. And let us know what you think. We'd love to get your feedback.
You've had a fascinating career to date, and we'd love to pick into some of that. But what has been your journey so far?
It's great. So I actually have a degree in economics and then I went off to get an MBA. So I guess, a little bit of that commerciality, understanding business, being able to, look at it that way, I would credit to that. I was very blessed and fortunate to work with a number of different consulting firms. And in the organization design course, with the CIPD, we do talk about being able to get into the mindset of being a consultant, being able to scope, being able to project manage, being able to read different personal styles at work. It's not personalities, it's personal styles at work, being able to, really bridge that divide. So I worked with a few consulting firms. I then decided, it's interesting when you're an external consultant, you have sort of two masters. You have your client, but you have your consulting firm. And, sometimes the objectives don't necessarily align. Your performance measurements are different. And I realized that I really love what I do. I didn't necessarily want to get into a sales role, which consulting, would have taken me to. I wanted to do the work. So I hopped out of that consulting boat. And that's when I took on my first position over at Heathrow. And that was an eye-opener, to learn how organizations work internally, how organizations really make decisions, that you don't have to create, 50 to 100-page PowerPoint decks. You just have to have that conversation. You have to build that trust, which, it is difficult when you're just outside in. I then moved from consulting to doing some independent projects. Somehow I always landed on some of the most challenging. I sat in Northern Rock after it was the bank. It had the first run on a bank in 150 years in British history. That was during the financial crisis. I sat in the prison and probation system as they tried to merge under the Ministry of Justice. I just tended to just land myself in very interesting roles, and I love that. I love the big challenge. I love the big, bold aspirations. And, I was really blessed that senior executives kind of opened the door to me and were ready to have that conversation.
I was going to say, so you've worked across really different sectors. So
you're listening to when I said that prison and probation services, aren't you?
Yeah. And I'm just interested in your take. So obviously that kind of how important is sector experience in the work that you do? It's kind of one of those classic debates, isn't it?
It is.
Do you need sector experience or not? Debate. And I'm really interested in your take on that.
No, it was really interesting to me because in consulting, we went from being change experts, and then the consulting industry reorganized to try and make us industry experts. And just, by default, I ended up in the oil and gas, the energy industry. And, I had never really kind of worked in that particular industry before. And then, like I said, I went over to Terminal 5. So what I say to people is, I think that's a little bit of my superpower, is that I'm industry agnostic. When you look at, now I think there are areas and professions where that is hugely valuable. But when you're talking about organization design, when you're talking about organizational behavior, when you're talking about how humans, kind of might operate, the thing you discover is you discover the patterns. And actually, I think some industries hugely benefit from examples outside of their industry. This is where you, with your perspective, can really kind of spark a little bit of innovation. And this is what we did, the European example that I gave you, because, one of the things we did a little bit of research, and we said, well, Starbucks is sort of a premium or a luxury, I guess, coffee brand to some. Starbucks doesn't organize itself by countries. They don't have an expensive infrastructure with 20 to 25 country directors. They look at themselves in a different way. So we went totally, to a consumer industry, but to try and take some innovation, try and take some ideas. And I think that is what makes the conversation engaging, makes it a bit of magic, because, we're in territory we haven't been in before. Well, that's interesting. Let's think about what that sparks in terms of some ideas.
Brilliant. I've got a personal curiosity question here, because you are our first person who has an economist background. How has that shaped your outlook on the work?
Oh gosh, yeah. Now I'm kind of regretting saying that. I mean, do you know what? I don't know. I went to the University of Chicago. It was a liberal arts education, so a lot of thinking, a lot of writing. The economics was sort of the hard, maybe a little bit of the numbers side of it. I'm not scared of numbers. I'm a bit of a data junkie. But I'm also not scared of the softer side. And maybe that's the liberal arts sort of education. But I think we'll go back to your point. What I have seen is that there is a lack of commerciality in the conversation around organization design and organization development. And it's until you are able to have that commercial conversation that you're going to be able to walk in confidently and credibly into that boardroom. And that's where the conversation needs to happen. I've worked under COOs, I've worked under CEOs, I've worked under chief people officers, I've worked alongside transformation directors. This particular capability is strategic. It needs to have a seat at the strategic table. Otherwise, we're not really unleashing the true potential. And I'm just very fortunate to have been put in situations where I was able to exercise that strategic muscle, and organizations definitely saw the benefit of that. And it's represented in their growth. It's represented in their numbers. And that's where we need to measure ourselves.
And one of the things you talked about there was your involvement in Heathrow and T5. So Terminal 5, for the uninitiated, it was probably one of the biggest sort of construction projects in the whole of the UK. Newspapers were watching it. It was huge. Yeah. It was a vast thing, wasn't it? What were some of your learnings from that?
Terminal 5 was an incredible undertaking for the UK. It was, we always laugh because we said it was 20 years in the making. It took sort of 15 years to talk about it and 4 years to build it. And it was the first time that the UK had taken on that size of a project. It actually was the biggest construction project in Europe at the time. And the UK had never demonstrated that it was able to deliver that sort of a program. And not only just to build a terminal, but, integrate it into the operational side of Heathrow, one of the world's busiest terminals. So, just the sheer context of it, was overwhelming. And to be honest, that's when I had my pivot point from being a change specialist to an organization design practitioner. And I'll never say specialist, because I think that this is something, because it's so contextual, the learning is always evolving. But that program, we had to brace ourselves. Year one, we had to move the rivers, protect the wildlife, plant the trees that were going to be there 4 years from now. Year two was when we needed to pour a lot of concrete and get that, land sort of, ready. Year three was about build. We had to get these massive buildings up and running. And year four was about systems and integration. So each year had a particular theme. And, for me to lend my organization design perspective, I had to help that leadership team think about how they needed to represent themselves and operate so that the highest priority was always that theme. Now, the consistent theme throughout that particular construction program was safety. So T5, still now, I think, broke a number of safety records in terms of minimizing the number of fatalities. It did open, on time. It did stay within budget. There was a lot of creativity with respect to how we did the contracts. At any point, we had 8,000 people, 35 nationalities on site. It was an overwhelming undertaking. I was fortunate to have leaders that I learned from that had made some bold decisions. One of the big design decisions for T5 was to separate that from the existing sort of organization, sort of to have it as a separate organization with its own P&L, with its own leadership team, with its own managing director. That was one of the most fundamental decisions that was made. And then year on year, we incorporated both organization design and organization development skills, techniques, year on year, to make sure that program really achieved its mission. I can't say there's not enough words for me to describe how pivotal that particular program was for my career.
And interestingly, they all these different people working for it weren't all working for the same company. A lot of them were subcontractors, but you had to create a sense of identity amongst them, didn't you?
Yeah. So the again, just a genius strategy from a people and an organization development perspective was to have everyone represent Terminal 5. So do you remember when I said that we're all in it for the same goal? And when you turn the volume up on that, which is what we did at Terminal 5, the message is that regardless of where we were coming from, we all wanted the same goal. And we all worked for the same team. We worked for Team T5. And we were all going to walk away, whether you spent a month there, 6 months there, 2 years there, 4 years there, we were all going to walk away. And every time we passed by Terminal 5, we were going to say, I built that. And so to have that one team environment, and from a safety perspective, that was absolutely essential, because you needed, regardless of which team you worked for, if you spotted something that wasn't safe or that was a hazard, you were able to raise your hand and say, as one team, that's a safety hazard. So just a genius program wrapped around the culture, the development side of it. Of course, the design side of it was key to bring in the right talent at the right time, to make sure that we had the right focus on airfield or buildings or systems or integration. And I think the other thing I would say, to people doing organization design is we often evaluate job roles and we sort of rank or tier people according to their job evaluation. The health and safety role wasn't the biggest role on the program, but the health and safety role would always sit on the executive leadership team, and they would always have first voice at every leadership team meeting because safety was always of paramount. And, I think the safety record speaks sort of for itself for T5.
Oh, those signals are really important, aren't they? I love what you said there about the health and safety person always having the first voice.
Yes.
It's little things like that that really amplify and
Yes.
kind of reinforce the importance.
Yes, absolutely. It's the thing that determines, it speaks volumes about your culture.
That's a kind of embodiment of, rather than just saying the words, that safety is our number one priority. It embodies it, doesn't it? So what do you love most about the work that you do?
Oh gosh, what don't I love? I love the unpredictability of it. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I think that's why. And I'm glad I've sat at different seats around the table. I've been an external consultant. I've been an internal consultant. I've been a director leading org design teams. I think I've probably scaled up teams, from scratch 3 or 4 times, which I love, developing people, teaching. And I'm now able to, I've coached a lot of executives. It's amazing to see executives go through their own personal journey. It's difficult to lead an organization design program because it is so pervasive. When an organization makes that decision, it's a very, very pervasive intervention, and it takes a lot of stamina. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of integrity, and to stand next to executives and sort of, coach them, work with them through those programs, come out on the other side. Sometimes these executives are leading these programs, and the end result is that they will no longer have a role. Imagine that. Imagine the leadership quality it takes to do one of those programs. I just love that whole human aspect of it. I love seeing the aha moments when you're able to really, when people get it. I love when you get into difficult times. Northern Rock, it was obvious that there were going to be some drastic, massive changes. The European Union had given the bank 6 months to separate the retail business from the mortgage business. And yet, when you're able to have those authentic conversations with individuals whose, sheer livelihoods were at stake, they had given so much equity into an organization, and yet, they wanted to see it survive through. So I think that is, that's just human fuel. I love being a part of that story.
I've got an optional question for you here. One of the things you talked about there is the senior team.
Yes.
The executive, and they're at the vanguard of everything. But another group of leaders that play an important role is the next tier down.
Yeah.
So they're not the ones at the top table, but they're the ones who are sort of integrating the new design. They're often too big to be a team. There's a lot of them depending on the scale of the organization as well.
Yes.
What kind of things, what are some of the considerations when you're designing an organization to support this group of managers? Because they potentially are the catalyst for this being a success, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I always insist to not work with just the executive team. So I say to them, give me, and even if it's each of them, give me someone that's going to represent your team or your organization. I want to go those next levels down. That's a bit of a, change management sort of trick as well, which is, involve these people early, get them engaged, but they're the ones that have the scars. They're the ones that have the bruises. They see the problems, and 9 times out of 10, they actually know what needs to happen. They just need the voice. So remember, just making sure that voice is heard. So I always insist on having a bigger team to work with, to collaborate with, to educate. So I recognize who the decision makers are, but I always insist on having that next level down. And for the most part, I think organizations are really willing to do that. They recognize that I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to give my own time and effort to engage and educate that next level down. So I really like to do that. When you're going into design, I guess it comes in stages. When you're doing the operating model, that's one of the high level pieces. And we always insist on doing it in a collaborative way and getting that next level down. But when you get into the detailed design, I want to go even deeper. I want to involve, even the next levels down from that. And, it's fascinating to work with executives and get them to maybe open up. I remember working with one executive, who just wanted to do it all himself. For a couple of months, he walked around, with a a little org chart in his back pocket. And, every time I'd see him, I'd be like, how you doing, Mark? And he'd be like, oh, Jay, I'm glad I ran into you. Pull out that little sheet of paper. I was like, Mark, no, let's get some quality time. For them to then get that realization that they would benefit so much more if they just opened up. And in that instance, one of the people that they feared that they were gonna scare came up to them and said, look, I know that this might be a risk to me or my job, but can I help you with that? Can I be involved? And just that. And all of a sudden, we opened up a collaborative, just honest conversation. So yeah, I'm all about being open. I know there are instances when you can't. I understand that. But I also always sort of say, if you have unions, try and engage them as early as possible. That, there are reasons why organizations need to do what they do. It's not secretive. I think organizations should evolve their design with changes in strategy, changes in context, new leadership. There are so many catalysts. We don't need to fear it. We just need to do it well because it matters.
Yeah, you've answered the question I was going to ask about that kind of real human side of kind of the work we do in org design and kind of the anxiety it creates sometimes. And I think the evolution thing's really interesting. Do you think organizations are too quick to do kind of big transformational change versus kind of incremental evolution?
I think organizations maybe have been trained. So that's a great question. I'm hoping, I think organizations have been trained to wait until maybe they see a problem and then act on it. And organizations, they can survive for a long time unproductively. It amazes me how long organizations can survive unproductively, inefficiently. So imagine that is creeping up on you for a long, long time. And, by the time they decide to do something or kind of either admit that there's a problem, or see a problem, it's like a house foundation. It's like, oh gosh, now we have to do something quite drastic. So definitely not for the, let's wait and then boom. In our courses, in our core philosophy of organization design and development, in a car, you wouldn't buy a car and never get it serviced, never get it maintained, never change even just, the brake pads. Why? I mean, it's safety and it's health. So why would you do that with an organization? You need to kind of keep vigilant. And if you do that, then actually you don't have to make those huge changes. Making massive organizational changes, that hurts. That's pervasive. You are taking the organization back a few steps. So you better have a plan, to catch it up. You're playing with emotional equity. And I think that's a bit dangerous. We don't need to do that. So yeah, I think organizations have just been trained to do that. And I'm trying to educate them not to do that. That's my goal. You don't have to.
So we talked about what you enjoy most about the work you do. What do you find most challenging?
Oh, yes. I guess I find it challenging. When, let me think about that one. Because there's so many challenging aspects of it. And the reason I'm hesitating is because I think I find the challenge has changed as I've developed my practice. So I would say when I was maybe a younger practitioner, a newer practitioner, the challenge was to really be heard, to kind of be able to talk about the capability for what it is, for the strategic purpose that it has. And it might be because people think that HR or people profession or organization is something that they already know about. And so it's very hard to come in there and offer a unique point of view or feel like you can offer a unique point of view. So I think, in my early days, the challenge was, just getting people to listen, to operate at the right level. So then what happens when you start to operate at the right level? Well, you really feel the politics of how organizations operate. And I think sometimes organizations let themselves down because, at that very kind of senior level, there's a lot of tension, sometimes for good reasons, because, there's so much passion to move an organization a certain way that I think it's very easy for executives to get blindsided. And so it takes longer to build the trust. And so I find that challenging. If you don't already come across a leader that sort of believes in the capability, then it just takes a little bit longer to build that trust. And sometimes you don't. I mean, I had an instance in an organization where there was a senior executive, and no matter how much the CEO said to them, have a conversation with Jaimini. I'm just saying a conversation. Just hear her perspective out. He's like, nope, I'm doing fine. Things are flying off the shelf. I don't need any help. I don't have time. I'm a retail expert. I've been doing this for 40 years. And no. So I wasn't able to get in the door for 2 years. And meanwhile, that scenario that I was talking to you about, where, they're not changing the brakes, they're not doing their maintenance, they're not changing the oil, that was all catching up. And finally, one of their markets just didn't perform. One of their highly dependable markets just didn't perform. And they just said, whoa, that's unusual. What's going on there? Maybe I need to call Jaimini. So, sometimes I'm called in a little bit later into the process. I wish it was sooner, but we took care of that one. There's always a way.
And is there anything particularly interesting you in the field of org design at the moment? Any kind of emerging trends or kind of shifts you're seeing?
I have to say, I love the technology aspect of it blending in. So, I still find sometimes teams creating organization links or connections, org charts with on PowerPoint or not at all. But I think there's a lot of different technologies that are coming through to assist with the analysis, with the baselining. It's hugely important. So if you're not a data junkie, that's okay. But, have someone that really is comfortable with data, with numbers, being able to kind of mash it up. It is one of my products that I have for organizations. I call it the org mashup, where we just take lots of different data and we show them different perspectives. And that's important, because if you're going to run an organization that's full of, humans, people that are giving, so much equity, know your organization. And as an example, one of the CEOs I worked with, and I did this org mashup for them, and they're a luxury player, but we did this org mashup, and the largest workforce worked in finance. The huge spread of workforce worked in finance. Most of the people costs were in finance. And, when I presented this particular visual to the CEO, her reaction was, hang on, am I running a bank? And, imagine that. It's like, well, you tell me. I was just offering a perspective. And again, executives can make very quick decisions on that. So I love the technology aspect of it coming through. I'm really excited about what AI can do. I'm not sure, but organization design, so, is about work. It's not about people. So what is it that technology can do regarding the work that gives us, huge input? I'm excited about companies now doing a little bit more research around organization design and development. I think back in the day, I felt like I had to do my own business case, and it felt really soft. And I just wasn't able to sell it. But I love the research that's coming out that absolutely can contextualize, factualize what a high investment capability that this is. And I think that gives a lot of credibility to the profession.
You said you were born in Uganda and then you lived in the US. And how has that kind of global experience and perspective shaped how you approach your work?
Yeah, I love tapping into my cultural backgrounds. So I guess, when you work with different people, and I think, when you work in different cultures, especially from a business perspective, there's this element of appreciating, adapting, and understanding, how that particular culture works. And I guess what it's helped me to do is know when to kind of listen a bit more, know when to be a little bit more directive, know how to question or challenge. And it's all been a learning process. Know the etiquette of hierarchy is really important. When I worked in, I did a little bit of work in South Korea, and thankfully, I partnered with my colleague who was from Japan, overseeing the region, and we needed to interview all of the executives, and there was a real anxiety about talking about their organization, talking about their leader, and we had to set those interviews up in a very different way to how I might do it in America or how I might approach it in the UK. And, first and foremost, you want to make that human connection. You want to build that trust. And working in different countries educates you on how to do that. And I hugely value that. I feel like I'm able to adapt my style, not for my sake, because, I'm there on behalf of the brand, and I'm there on behalf of, very courageous leaders. So I feel like I'm able to adapt my style so that, together we're sort of able to progress, whether it's a conversation, whether it's a question. I know in some cultures I am their voice. And again, that's a huge responsibility. But because I know that, I'm going to approach that conversation knowing that I'm someone else's voice, and being able to, slightly mend, the way that I approach a situation.
When you look back at your career so far, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned that you take forward with you?
Oh, some great lessons. Looking back now, to my younger self, I didn't have the confidence, and I thought that there was a way to do things, and I needed to learn that way. And of course, much later on, you realize that, that way is your way, to have confidence in your style, and your ability. The other thing is, I guess I might have thought that, and this might be the consulting side, but, that I needed to really be good at everything. And, I would, try very hard to be the data analyst, to be the great facilitator, to be the strategist. And of course, as you mature, as I've matured, I've loved seeing the potential and talent in different individuals. I've loved building the teams where I'm able to recognize what I can bring to the table, but to actually build a team around me that can complement each other. So, I've learned that, and I've learned to really enjoy that diversity. I've learned when organization design isn't the right intervention, or it isn't the right time, or I'm not working with the right leader. And to be able to, in some situations, I've actually recused myself from a project or from moving something forward because, I felt that I wasn't going to add that value. Just the circumstances weren't right. That consulting doesn't teach you that. You just stick to it.
Well, sometimes consulting teaches the opposite, doesn't
exactly.
it? Exactly. Yeah. And you could sort of tell that with the story you're sort of saying in terms of bringing in, you could have very easily picked up that strategy discussion, couldn't you? But knowing to bring in someone else, and that reinforces your position as well. So when it comes back to you again, you've got even more legitimacy to work with the team, haven't you?
Yes, you hope so. I think, the ethos is, continue to do what you feel is right. And, people will have different opinions on it, but as long as you in your gut, feel that what you're doing is right, then there is that likelihood that it will come back to you. And I think, I'd like to think that people that are in my network, that I worked with before, would gladly work with me again, or, that's how I was able to branch off and run my own business is, some of the executives that had worked with me before, as they moved on to a different role, they would call me and they would say, look, can you give me a perspective on this? And those are the types of relationships that you want to carry forward. That I like to carry forward. That's what I've learned is that's what matters to me.
And how do you invest in your own learning and development?
The great thing, and I haven't even talked about this, the other thing that I love about having so much diverse experience is to offer that back. So when I took up the CIPD assignment to, initially it was just to teach the existing organization design course. They gave me an opportunity to rejig it, so I put a little bit of my own influence into that course, and then to be able to actually teach that course. I learned so much from the participants that are in that course, because I learn about their fears, I learn about their anxieties, I learn about their success, I learn about what they might have taken away from bits of the course, and they'll come back the next time. It might be the very following week, and I love to hear how they might have just put something into practice. So yeah, I mean, I guess that, I mean, like I said, there's some great research coming out now that I like to read about. There's lots of different views coming about that I like to read about. There are also some myths that I'm trying to debunk that are still existing, which keeps me, I think, on podcasts and maybe speaking events. But I learned from all of those because, you know, like I said, the practice is so contextual. And so you really, really have to understand both the context in which the business is operating, but, you know, the technological context, the behavioral context, the fact that, you know, as a society, you know, we're operating in a geopolitical crisis, a health crisis, an economic crisis. You know, we haven't been here before. You know, how do we incorporate all of that into our thinking to help organizations thrive and then for people to thrive?
Fabulous. And if people listening want to learn more about org design, are there any particular books or resources or podcasts that you'd recommend people look at?
So, you know what? I absolutely love Naomi Stanford, and I think her book on designing organizations is fantastic. Is one of on my to-do list, which is to find, you know, some more podcasts. I would encourage people to, I mean, ChatGPT is great. You just ask ChatGPT, you know, give me the latest statistics on the benefits of organization design, and it'll just give you a pile of research. You know, read the current research. I find that fascinating. I'm trying to learn more about the different technologies that are out there. So you've got OrgView, Q5 Partners has their own. You've got Agent Noon that's come out. So I think be curious, you know, learn about the different technologies. You know, I'm trying to get my own stories out there. I think what I found is the bruises and scars that I'm able to share, you know, really go a long way because people recognize themselves in those situations. So, you know, as I said, I hesitate from calling it, you know, an expertise or a specialism. You know, I think it's loads and loads of experience, and we all have lots of different experience that we can share and learn from each other.
Fantastic. And the question that we always end every podcast with, but people find really useful, is what advice would you give someone considering or just starting out in organization design? You know, you talked about the fact that people recognize it is important, but there are people that actually feel confident doing it. What are people sort of considering those first steps, wherever they may be, internal, external?
Yeah, I would say go for it, first and foremost. It's a wonderful skill and capability to have. I would say be bold in the projects that you take. I would say do get some sort of initial training, but nothing speaks for experience. So if you get offered a particular project or you get offered an opportunity, you know, definitely take that. I would say find a coach or a mentor. It doesn't have to be someone that you know that you have to pay for, but you know, find people that you believe in as good role models. You'd be surprised how many people are open to just getting on a phone call and offering some advice. It's a lovely community. We help each other. You know, I work my own practice, but you know, I call my friends up, my community up, and I'll still ask them. I was like, look, you know, I've got this particular situation. I'm thinking about this operating model. You know, what's your view on it? And you know, they will always come at the other end of the phone. So I would say build up your community network. You know, find those challenging assignments. You know, that's where you're going to grow. I'm not talking about team design. That's not organization design. You know, get yourself stuck in, you know, a big strategic change that means something to the organization.
Brilliant. Well, Jaimini, I want to say a huge thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed that. It's been a really amazing blend of the practice of organisation design, some really rich stories, and just really, hard-won practical insights that I think is really going to accelerate people's understanding of the subject as well. Danny, what are you taking away from the conversation?
Yeah, I think you've done a lovely job of bringing it to life as a practice and as a field. So I think we're all on board with your campaign to kind of go for evolution rather than kind of big bang change much too late. So that was really, really good. And the importance of that connection to strategy and what that looks like in practice. And I love the phrase, a lot of strategies are glittering generalities. I think we see that often. That's going to be my new phrase.
That is going to go into the dictionary. So.
It is, yeah.
No, you guys are great. I honestly love listening to you. You guys are so much fun. I've been looking forward to this conversation because, you ask such insightful questions and I love that. That's what we need, just some genuine, detailed questions. So thank you so much for having me.
No worries. And the things that stood out for me, I think the thing is know the numbers. Like, don't be afraid of them. You got to enter the grammar of the people that you're working with, and they're governed by the numbers and the results as well. So that's really important. And also reminding of the importance of purpose and getting everyone to connect it. So you've got the higher context that everyone connects to as well. There's just so much value in this. If people want to connect with you, Jaimini, if people want to follow your work, if they want to reach out to you, maybe they've got an organisation design project that they're scratching their heads about, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
So there's a few. Please, just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on there, quite a lot, and I try and share some insights or things that I've, kind of thinking about or publishing. I have my own website, which is jaimini.co.uk. That gives you, a few little case studies, some thought pieces that I've done. And I have some courses with CIPD. And if you're a CIPD member, some of those are free. So you can actually just hear me out and listen to some of my views in more detail.
Brilliant. I can vouch for the CIPD program because obviously I've been on it. It was excellent, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think there's just the resources that come with it too are just brilliant. Well, Jaimini, I want to say a huge thank you. What we'd love, if you are watching this and you think you know someone that would benefit from gaining Jaimini's brilliant insights, then please do share it. We love the fact that every day more and more people are sharing the podcast. The audience is growing. We're hitting more and more countries all of the time. Danny, as today, how many countries is it?
88 listeners in 88 countries last time we
88 countries, which is brilliant because it just shows just the richness of the OD organisation design, organisation development community as well. If you have enjoyed it, we'd also love it if you hit the like button and subscribe as well, because again, that also boosts the profile and it means we get brilliant guests like Jamie to agree to come on as well. But most importantly, thank you so much, Jaimini. We really appreciate it. It's been such a great conversation. It's exceeded our expectations. So thank you so much. I think people are going to get a lot of value from it.
Oh, you guys are too kind. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.